They saw the gray at her temples and called it weakness. It was the first thing the younger officers noticed when she stepped off the transport bus at Fort Draken, a place that boiled talent down to its essential, brutal truth. They saw the lines etched around her eyes and called them fatigue. In the crisp, unforgiving light of the high desert, Ilera Vance looked like a mistake, a clerical error that had wandered onto the grounds of a place designed to forge weapons out of men half her age. She carried her duffel bag with a quiet economy of motion, her posture straight but not rigid, her gaze fixed on the administrative building as if the jeers and sideways glances were nothing more than desert wind. They bounced off the placid surface of her composure, leaving no ripple. The whispers followed her like a shadow. A 42-year-old woman in the specialist intake program, an entry-level pipeline. Her file was a ghost, a single sheet of paper with no commendations, no previous postings of note, no history at all beyond basic training completed 2 decades prior. To the ambitious, hardened cadre of Fort Draken, she was less than a rookie. She was a liability, a political statement someone in high office was making. She was a body to be processed and, inevitably, broken. Colonel Mathis looked at that same file in his office, the paper feeling thin and fraudulent in his hands. He was a man who believed in records, in the documented lineage of a soldier's career. A soldier without a past was a soldier without a foundation. He looked up at Ilera, who stood before his desk in perfect parade rest, her expression unreadable. "Vance," he said, his voice a low gravel honed by years of command. "Your file is sparse." He left the word hanging in the air, an invitation for an explanation. Ilera's eyes, the color of a stormy sea, met his. "It is what it is, sir," she replied. Her voice was calm, low, and held no trace of apology or defensiveness. It was a simple statement of fact. Mathis leaned back, tapping a pen on his desk. He saw the gray strands in her dark hair, the weathered skin of her hands. He saw a woman who had seen more life than his lieutenants combined, yet her file claimed she had seen none of it in uniform. This is not a refresher course, specialist. This is an evaluation pipeline for special assignment consideration. The standards are absolute. The physical and psychological toll is immense. We have a washout rate of over 80% for candidates in their prime. He was warning her. He was giving her an out. "I understand, sir," she said. "I am here to meet the standard." Mathis sighed, a quiet puff of exasperation. He stamped her file with a heavy, final thud. "See Sergeant Thorne at the combatives facility. He's your lead instructor. Do not be a problem for him, Vance. Do not be a problem for me." Sergeant Thorne was a monument of a man, carved from granite and fury. His neck was as thick as a tree trunk, and his voice was a constant, barking roar that echoed across the training grounds. He believed in pain as a teaching tool and in humiliation as a motivator. When Ilera reported to him, he looked her up and down, a slow, contemptuous appraisal. A smirk played on his lips. Well, he boomed, letting the entire platoon of candidates hear him. "Looks like they're letting grandmas play soldier now." A few of the younger men snickered. Ilera's face remained a mask of placid neutrality. She did not flinch. She did not react. She simply waited. Her stillness unnerved him more than any retort could have. "You got something to say, specialist?" he goaded. "No, Sergeant," she said. Thorne's eyes narrowed. He hated that quiet. He saw it as arrogance. "Good. We'll see how quiet you are when you're spitting up your lunch on the obstacle course." He turned his back on her, dismissing her completely. "All right, you maggots, listen up." The dismissal became a daily ritual. During formation, Thorne would find fault with the alignment of her belt. On the rifle range, he would stand behind her, his voice a constant, nagging presence in her ear. "Control your breathing, Vance. You're wheezing like an old woman." Yet her shot groupings were impossibly tight, 5 rounds clustered so close together they looked like a single, ragged hole in the center of the target. She never boasted. She simply cleaned her rifle with a focused, reverent patience, her hands moving with a familiarity that was both intimate and deeply ingrained. She treated the weapon not as a tool, but as a partner, an extension of her own will. The armorers noted that her rifle was the cleanest they had ever seen, maintained with a watchmaker's precision. A young private first class named Calloway watched her. He was quiet, like her, and he noticed things others missed. He saw that while the younger, stronger men sprinted through the first mile of the 5-mile run, boasting and jostling for position, Alara maintained a steady, almost metronomic pace. By mile 3, the sprinters were heaving, their strides shortening. By mile 4, she was passing them, her breathing even, her expression unchanged. She didn't look at them as she went by. She just ran, her focus on a distant point on the horizon. Calloway saw that it wasn't about speed, it was about endurance. It was about an unbreakable discipline that burned slow and hot, long after the flash fires of youthful arrogance had turned to ash. He saw the way she stood, perfectly balanced, her weight distributed for instant reaction. He saw the way her eyes constantly scanned her surroundings, not with anxiety, but with a deep, consuming awareness. He had grown up on a farm, and she reminded him of the alpha mare in his father's herd, the one who was never startled because she had already seen everything coming. The institutional arrogance was a suffocating blanket. The cadre of young lieutenants, fresh from West Point and full of theoretical knowledge, treated her as a ghost. They spoke around her, through her, as if she were a piece of training equipment. Lieutenant Raskin, the most arrogant of them all, with a chiseled jaw and an ego to match, made her his personal project of ridicule. "Hey, Vance," he'd call out in the mess hall. "Need help cutting your steak? Don't want you to strain yourself." His friends would laugh, a chorus of condescension. Alara would just continue eating, her movements deliberate, her silence a wall they could not breach. Her lack of reaction infuriated them. They wanted to see her crack. They wanted to tear, a flash of anger, a sign that their barbs were landing. They got nothing. They mistook her discipline for weakness, her silence for fear. They had no frame of reference for the kind of peace a person makes with the world after walking through hell and coming out the other side. They were boys playing with fire, and she was the hearth, long accustomed to the flame. The pressure began to mount as the combatives module started. This was Sergeant Thorne's kingdom. The air in the gymnasium was thick with the smell of sweat, rubber, and machismo. Thorne taught a system of aggressive, overwhelming force. It was about power and speed, about breaking an opponent's will with shock and awe. "There is no defense," he would roar, slamming a fist into a heavy bag. "There is only attack, and a more vicious counterattack." He demonstrated techniques with a brutal flourish, throwing younger soldiers around the mats like dolls. His eyes would often flick to Alara. Her form was different. When they practiced joint locks and throws, her movements were smaller, more precise. She used leverage, not muscle. She would achieve the same result as Thorne, subduing her opponent, but with half the effort. Thorne saw this efficiency as wrong. It was not his way. "Vance, what is that? You're supposed to drive through him, not dance with him. Put your back into it." Alara would simply reset and perform the technique again, her way. She wasn't being defiant. She was simply incapable of moving incorrectly, of wasting energy. Her body had been programmed by a different, more lethal software. "Yes, Sergeant," she would say, her voice betraying no emotion. The chasm between what he saw and what she was grew wider with every session. The culmination of the combatives module was the Reaper drill. A single soldier was placed in the center of the mat and faced with multiple, simultaneous opponents. It was a test of endurance, spatial awareness, and raw will. It was designed to simulate the chaos of close-quarters combat. It was designed to break people. Thorne gathered the candidates in a semicircle. His eyes were gleaming. This was his theater. In a real fight, you don't get to pick your odds, he bellowed, pacing before them. The enemy doesn't line up and wait his turn. Today, we separate the warriors from the liabilities. His gaze settled on Alara, and a cruel smile touched his lips. "We're going to run a special scenario today. A real-world test. 5-on-1. A murmur went through the crowd. The standard drill was 3-on-1, and that was considered a near-impossible task. 5-on-1 was not a test. It was a punishment. It was a public execution. PFC Calloway felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He looked at Alara. She stood perfectly still, her face as serene as ever. She blinked once, slowly. Raskin, Cole, Bennett, Davis, Chun, Thorne barked. The 5 lieutenants he named stepped forward. Raskin, the ringleader, cracked his knuckles, a wide, predatory grin on his face. They were the biggest, fastest, and most aggressive officers in the platoon. They moved toward the center mat, circling the empty space where their victim would soon stand. This was the moment they had been waiting for. This was their chance to finally shatter her infuriating calm. "Vance!" Thorne roared. "On the mat!" Alara walked forward. The gym fell silent. Even the usual background noise of clanking weights and whirring fans seemed to die away. Every eye was on her. She stepped onto the mat, her bare feet making no sound. She wore standard physical training gear, a gray t-shirt and black shorts. On the inside of her left wrist, almost hidden by her watch strap, was a small, faded tattoo. It was a whisper of ink, a stylized shape that looked like a ghost, its edges blurred by time and sun. Colonel Mathis watched from the observation deck above, his arms crossed, his face a grim mask of skepticism. He had come to witness the inevitable end of the Vance experiment. He expected to see her fold, to finally justify his initial assessment of her flimsy file. He was here to see a liability confirmed. The 5 officers circled her like sharks. Raskin gave a mock bow. "Don't worry, Grandma," he sneered. "We'll make this quick." Alara didn't answer. She simply sank into a low, balanced stance, her hands held loosely at her sides. She wasn't coiled like a snake. She was settled like a mountain. She was waiting. Thorne blew the whistle, the sound shrill and violent in the silence. Raskin charged, leading with a shoulder, a bull rush designed to slam her to the ground through sheer force. It was the move Thorne had taught them, a pure expression of aggressive dominance. But Alara wasn't there. At the last possible second, she pivoted on the ball of her right foot. It wasn't a retreat. It was a redirection. Her body moved no more than 6 inches to the side. As Raskin's momentum carried him past her, she extended her right hand, not in a block, but as a guide. Her fingers held stiff and together, jabbed precisely into the nerve cluster below his ear. At the same time, her left foot tapped the back of his knee. His body, suddenly deprived of its signals and its balance, folded like a cheap suit. He crashed to the mat in a heap, the wind knocked out of him, a look of pure, bewildered shock on his face. The entire sequence took less than a second. It was so fluid, so economical, that many in the room weren't sure what they had just seen. It looked like Raskin had tripped. But the other 4 saw it. Cole and Bennett exchanged a look of disbelief before their training kicked in. They attacked together, one from the front, one from the back, a pincer movement designed to overwhelm. Cole lunged for her head. Bennett came in low, aiming for her legs. Alara moved. She dropped her center of gravity, ducking under Cole's wild swing. As she did, she grabbed the wrist of his extended arm with both hands. She didn't try to stop his momentum. She accelerated it. She spun with his movement, pulling him off balance and using his entire body as a shield. Bennett, coming in low, crashed headlong into his own partner's legs. The 2 men went down in a tangled, clumsy mess of limbs. Before they could even process their mistake, Alara's foot stomped down hard on the side of Cole's knee, not with enough force to break, but enough to send a blinding jolt of pain through the joint, incapacitating him. She stepped back, her balance perfect, her hands once again loose at her sides. 2 more down. The fight was less than 5 seconds old. The gym was now utterly silent. The snickers had died. The air was thick with a new, dawning horror. This was not a woman. This was a force of nature. Davis and Chun, the last 2, hesitated. The cockiness was gone, replaced by a cold, primal fear. They had been trained to fight soldiers, not ghosts. They looked at each other, a silent agreement passing between them. They would be more careful. They advanced slowly, cautiously, their hands up, circling her. They were trying to find an angle, an opening. They found nothing. Alara stood in the center of their circle, a point of absolute stillness in their storm of indecision. She was giving them time to think, and she knew that was the worst thing for them. Their training was about reaction, not thought. Thought bred hesitation. Hesitation bred defeat. Davis finally broke. He feinted high with his left hand and shot in for a low takedown, a classic wrestling move. Alara's response was a simple, brutal piece of physics. As he came in, she dropped her right elbow, a short, sharp, downward strike, onto the back of his neck. It wasn't a knockout blow. It was a shutdown. His entire nervous system flared and then went dim. His muscles went slack, and he slumped to the mat, unconscious before he hit the floor. Now only Chun was left. He was pale, his eyes wide. He stood frozen, looking at his four fallen comrades littered across the mat. He looked at Alara, who hadn't even broken a sweat. Her chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. Her sea-storm eyes were fixed on him, not with malice, but with a profound and unnerving patience. It was the look of a predator that knows the hunt is already over. Chun took an involuntary step back, then another. He held his hands up in a gesture of surrender. He wanted no part of what was happening. He was a soldier, not a sacrifice. Alara gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was an acknowledgement, an acceptance. She had not come here to hurt them. She had come here to meet the standard. The standard had been met. From the observation deck, Colonel Mathis stared, his knuckles white where he gripped the railing. He felt a cold dread mix with a sense of profound awe. He had seen bar fights and battlefield brawls. He had seen controlled sparring and bloody chaos. He had never seen this. This was not fighting. This was a form of art, a lethal geometry of motion that was as beautiful as it was terrifying. His eyes were drawn again to her wrist, to the faded ink, the ghost. And then a memory, buried deep in the classified recesses of his mind, clicked into place. A story he'd heard a decade ago from a grizzled CIA operative in a dusty, forgotten corner of the world. A story about a phantom unit, a Tier 1 team so secret their very existence was denied. They were called the Spectres. They were sent to places that didn't exist on any map to solve problems that couldn't be acknowledged. They were legends, whispered about in hushed tones by the few who even knew to whisper. And the best of them, the leader, the one they called the Ghost of the Ghosts, had a call sign. Spectre 1, Mathis breathed, the name a prayer and a curse on his lips. He was not looking at Specialist Vance, the middle-aged rookie. He was looking at a living legend. On the floor below, Sergeant Thorne's face was ashen. The swagger, the arrogance, the roaring confidence. It had all been stripped away, leaving behind a raw, gaping incomprehension. He had spent weeks trying to correct her form. He had tried to teach a shark how to swim. He felt a wave of professional shame so profound it made him physically sick. He looked at the 5 broken officers, the best he had, dismantled without effort. He looked at her, standing in serene silence, and he finally understood. He hadn't been watching a student. He had been witnessing a master. Down on the floor, a sound broke the spell. It was a single, slow clap. PFC Calloway was on his feet, his hands coming together, his face alight with a look of pure, unadulterated reverence. He wasn't clapping for a victory. He was clapping for the truth. Another soldier joined in, then another and another. The applause rolled through the gymnasium, hesitant at first, then growing into a thunderous ovation. It was a sound of apology, of respect, of awe. The lieutenants who had mocked her, the soldiers who had dismissed her, were all on their feet, their faces a mixture of shame and wonder. They were applauding the quiet strength they had mistaken for weakness, the discipline they had mistaken for fear. Alara didn't smile. She didn't bask in their praise. She simply gave a single, small nod to the gymnasium at large, a gesture of closure. Her part in this theater was done. She walked off the mat, her steps as quiet and deliberate as they had been when she entered. She moved past the stunned Sergeant Thorne, past the applauding soldiers. She picked up her small towel and her water bottle from the bench where she had left them. She wiped the dust of the mat from her hands and took a small sip of water. She was an island of calm in a sea of emotional upheaval. Colonel Mathis hurried down the stairs from the observation deck, his mind reeling. He intercepted her just as she was about to push through the doors leading out of the gym. "Vance," he began, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. He stopped. What would he say? "I'm sorry I judged you. I underestimated you. I thought you were nothing." The words felt hollow, pathetic. He looked at the woman before him, at the quiet power that radiated from her, and he felt humbled. "Your file," he finally managed to say, the words feeling inadequate. "It doesn't do you justice." Alara looked at him, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't triumph. It was a deep, ancient weariness, the look of someone who had carried the weight of a secret world for far too long. "It's just a file, sir," she said softly. It did its job. Her job had been to be invisible, to be underestimated, to be a ghost. The file was not a lie. It was the most effective camouflage she had ever worn. She gave him a slight nod, a gesture of professional courtesy, and then pushed open the heavy steel doors and walked out into the searing desert sun, leaving the noise and the revelation behind her. The doors swung shut, plunging the gymnasium back into a shocked silence, broken only by the groans of the recovering officers. Colonel Mathis stood frozen, staring at the door she had disappeared through. He felt like he had just touched history. Sergeant Thorne walked slowly to the center of the mat. He knelt down and picked up a discarded training helmet, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly. He stared at the empty space where Alara had stood, where she had systematically dismantled his entire belief system with a series of quiet, efficient movements. The institutional arrogance, the bedrock of his world, lay shattered at his feet. He looked at the young faces around him, their expressions of awe slowly hardening into a new, profound form of respect. They had all come here to be forged into weapons. They had just met the hand that had forged the forge. And she was gone, walking away in silence, leaving nothing behind but the lingering, ghost-like impression of her power and the dust of the mat settling in the quiet air.